Before we get started, we wanted to thank Liberty Mutual Surety for sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. Liberty Mutual Surety provides contract and commercial bonds for all size companies and contractors around the world. Liberty Mutual is here for you today, tomorrow, together. For more information on Liberty Mutual's breadth of surety products and solutions, visit www.libertymutualsurety.com. Now on to our show.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Welcome to this episode of Let's Get Surety. I have with me today my co-host Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP. Hey Mark.
Hey Kat, great to be here.
Thanks for being on. It's great to be able to record where we're here at NASBP's 2023 annual meeting. It's Tuesday, May 2nd. And we were able to grab our next guest speaker before he gets up on the stage, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, pretty perfect.
We're going to be talking and getting a little bit of an economic update before he shares it with the rest of the group. Dr. Anirban Basu, Chairman and CEO of Sage Policy Group Incorporated. Thanks for being on.
Privilege.
We are so happy to have you. In these crazy economic times, it's good to get a little bit of insight from someone in the know.
That's what you'll get, a little bit of insight. That's what I intend to deliver.
Before we start, maybe tell us a little bit about Sage.
Yes.
Well, we're based in Baltimore, Maryland. I founded it in 2004 as an economic and policy consultancy. My father begged me not to do it, so I should go back to the university and beg for my job back. But in fact, we've had a very good run. We have many clients around the country, some in other parts of the world, and we're now one of the better-known economic consultancies in the country, and so that's who we are.
That's
right,
terrific.
I think you do a lot of work on behalf of a number of construction organizations. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's one of the serendipitous aspects of starting a business. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to get into, and so several years ago we became the chief economist to Associated Builders and Contractors. Mm-hmm. The Baltimore chapter of that organization really pushed for us. Baltimore people often support Baltimore people, and then we became the chief economist to the Construction Financial Management Association, but also now the International Food Distributors Association, the Maryland Bankers Association. It's part of our business model to serve that chief economist function.
That's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
That's terrific.
So a lot of uncertainty right now, a lot of different forces and some seeming to continue. What do you think is the most important factor right now that people need to know about the economy?
That it is fragile, that there are lots of risks in the economy. We don't know what shoe is going to drop. Mm-hmm. Is it China, South Korea? Is it that the Federal Reserve tightens too much in terms of its interest rates? Is it that the dollar loses its value very sharply, causing even more inflation? We don't know because there's so many possible negative outcomes out there. Okay. My feeling has been that the equity markets in particular have not priced in some of this risk, but of course that's what makes a market, because many people think the economy is doing just fine, corporate earnings are strong, the Federal Reserve will pause its rate increase at some point and start to cut rates later this year perhaps, and that's all to the good for the economy and equity markets. Anyway, I think there's lots of risk, as evidenced by some of these bank failures we've seen recently.
Right, and that seems to be top of mind, the banking situation. I think there's a lot of concern probably in the construction community. What is the import for them, and what is that going to do for bank credit lines, for example?
It's really strange to me because when I speak to contractors, they still express lots of confidence. Okay. They have plentiful backlog. They will tell you they have more work than they know what to do with. Their principal challenge continues to be accumulating sufficient levels of human capital. They want workers. They need skilled workers. We do a survey at Associated Builders and Contractors every month, and our contractors say that they expect their sales, their profits, and their employment to grow over the next 6 months.
Really?
As if the Federal Reserve was not raising interest rates. Because typically, when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, it impacts construction pretty significantly.
Yeah.
Yep.
We still see lots of momentum. I think at some point it's going to fade. I'm a pessimist. I'm an economist. These contractors, they operate in the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so many things can go wrong for them, and yet they make it.
Yeah, no, they tend to be a confident lot. So, yeah. Yeah, which is why Surety might exist in some regards. So, but as you said, there are a lot of factors at play. Some that have been there. So, inflationary pressures. You said the workforce shortage, supply chain, and the disruptions with that. Do you see all those things continuing into the future?
I would say so. I mean, we're in an era of deglobalization. So there was a time when we were sourcing inputs from all over the world, but of course there is now trade tensions around the world, and supply chain had been disappearing from this country for decades.
Yep.
Now we're bringing some of that supply chain back, as people know, but a lot of these inputs are difficult to source. And so I was speaking to a group of mechanical contractors recently out of Washington, D.C., and they said to me that their lead time to acquire switchgear was in the range of 60 or 70 weeks, that their lead time for generators was something similar to that. And so these supply chain issues still out there, on top of the worker shortages and other things that are impacting contractors, including the elevated cost of capital.
Yeah, and that seems significantly longer than it had been in the past. Is that right? Yeah.
We were operating in this just-in-time inventory world, right? You want it, it's there for you just in time, not a day too soon, not a day too late. Fantastic. But that supply chain dynamic was broken by the pandemic, but also even before that, Brexit and trade wars between the United States and China, so on and so forth. So this has been amassing for quite some time, and now we're seeing it play out in real time.
I keep reading about the hope for technology, and can that be a solution towards the workforce shortages? What is your sense of that? Do you see or hear about greater adoption? Do you think that will be something that can really help in that regard?
Well, of course. I mean, technology is a force multiplier. Here's the issue in construction. It's a highly fragmented industry,
right,
and people are doing work right now to generate cash flow right now. They can't necessarily just switch technologies. They can't become idle for a year to retrain their staff.
Yep.
Manufacturing, they can't do the same thing either, but they have economies of scale. Intel, Boeing, 3M, these massive manufacturers who have the resources to retrain, retool, shut down a plant over here, train workers over there, and then bring them back online. And so, technology is a solution, but you can see technology absorption in construction is very slow relative to other industries.
So it can't happen fast enough to really counteract everything else that you're seeing.
It certainly has not happened fast enough to counter everything we've seen. If you look at the typical construction job site, it doesn't look so different than what it looked like several decades ago. There's a lot of people standing around. One person actually working with some heavy equipment. There's another person holding a sign that says slow and then go or something like this. And that's pretty much the job site. And in fact, if anything, our construction workforce is becoming less skilled. Why is that? It's because of retirement of baby boomers. Our most skilled construction workers, people who learned their love of working with hands, minds, and equipment at the same time, often in shop class in high school. We don't have much shop class left in high school.
That's a great point.
And so at the end of the day, you don't have enough young people entering the skilled trades to offset the people leaving.
I think a lot of industries find that, but it's probably more detrimental even in the construction industry.
It is. I'll tell you, some Americans are kind of peculiar about this because they don't want their kids to work in construction, but they also don't want anyone born in a foreign country to work in our construction segment either.
That doesn't leave many people left.
It does not. And we're trying to rebuild our nation's infrastructure. We're trying to rebuild our nation's supply chains, more computer chips, electric vehicles, so on and so forth. Where are the production workers? They don't exist in sufficient numbers.
Well, that's interesting. We hear talk about the need for immigration policy reform, and yet you don't see that the political will there. But do you think that's a potential source of addressing some of the labor shortages?
Oh, of course. There are so many talented people in the rest of the world. We're a fraction of the world's population, so there's some fabulous carpenters and painters and welders and millwrights out there. But again, under the last two presidential administrations, we've had some limits on legal immigration. Immigration policies become very confused in Washington, D.C. These are tough issues, by the way, and you need full-fledged adults to deal with them. There's not much evidence of adulthood in Washington, D.C., and so you don't get resolution of these issues, and the economy limps along as a result.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a great point. So
we talked a little bit about the here and now, but if you're looking a little bit further, 18, 24 months, we hear the R word being bantered about. Do you think that's inevitable, or do you think there are factors at play that mean that it may or may not happen?
Well, of course, recession is inevitable, but the question is it inevitable in the near term? And yes, I don't think it's inevitable in the near term. I think it's going to happen in the near term. I've been telling and I'll tell this audience that I think we're headed for a recession later this year. That there's a lot of pressure being put on the economy, obviously higher interest rates, but now with the failures of Silicon Valley Bank on March 9th and the Signature Bank 3 days later, and then what happened with First Republic in recent days, my sense is that bank credit is starting to tighten. And as bank credit starts to tighten, consumers find less access to credit, they spend less, the economy ends up in recession. Of course, construction, home building, whatever activities you can think of that are interest rate sensitive would also be eventually at least impacted by this. Home building, of course, already has been, but non-residential construction remains pretty strong. I'm skeptical that that's going to last, but of course, like I say, our surveyed contractors at Associated Builders and Contractors differ with my prognosis, and they're doing the work, so they're probably right.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody, that's a little bit of depressing news. Yeah. So are there some bright spots that you see in the construction economy over the 12, 24-month period?
None of the weakness I'm talking about pertains to public contractors, those who engage in infrastructure work. Anytime I speak to a public contractor, they tell me, we're going to be busy for the next 5 to 7 years, Anirban. So, you can understand why. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, signed by President Biden November 15th of 2021. Before that, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, signed by him on March 11th. And then, CHIPS and Science Act and, Inflation Reduction Act. And so all of these things are designed to help rebuild, reshape the built environment. That feeds into construction, particularly public works.
Right.
It's interesting.
Which is good news for us.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of the surety industry. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of, let's say you own a construction company, what kind of advice would you give to that principal at this point?
I think you have to have a great construction lawyer. You have to really negotiate these contracts in a way that allows for there to be significant risk remediation. We are starting to see subcontractor failure out there. Perhaps you've noticed this as well.
Yep.
People who signed fixed price contracts 18 or 24 months ago, wages have taken off, materials prices took off, and they find themselves short of the mark, and they are done. And so, force majeure clauses, whatever clauses people can put in to diminish risk, I think is very important. Obviously, as always is said, talk to your banker. Make sure that financial relationship is a good one. Talk to, obviously, the insurance brokerage community. Make sure your bonding is up to snuff. Those kinds of things. Get all those things in place, that financial infrastructure. Because ultimately, when firms fail, it's often because of the finances, not because of the lack of construction work, as it turns out. It's just they ran out of working capital often. So that's my advice to contractors. And because I think recession is coming, start stockpiling some cash.
Yeah,
This is not the time to be paying enormous bonuses or buying loved ones a mansion in Marco Island or something like that. It's I think time, in fact, to be quite conservative financially.
Right, including capital investments on their part. Maybe rethink that, whether it's really needed at this point.
Yeah, think about leasing versus owning and those kinds of things to try to stretch that near-term cash flow as much as possible and try to bankroll as much cash as is possible, I think. And again, you don't know, but what I can sense as an economist is that there's so much risk in the economy. So many things could go wrong. And, we also have a presidential election next year, and that can also be, disruptive to the economy as people take a wait-and-see attitude. And often wait-and-see attitudes are not good for cash flow.
Well, and you were talking about how all the contractors now are saying they've got plenty of work, they've got work for years to come. But I know I hear often that contractors are often, feast can be worse than famine for a contractor. Is that even more true in the coming environment with the recession possibly approaching? That's
often what I hear also, which is that it's not that firms die of starvation, it's that they die of overeating. And what often happens is that as they're anxious to rebuild their book of business, they take on work, they're willing to do things with less contingency, lower profit margins, less room for error, and at the end of the day, they take on too much and their cash flow can't handle it coming out of economic downturns. I don't think we're in that point of the cycle, though, yet.
Okay.
I don't think we've had the downturn yet. Right, not in terms of demand for construction services. I think it's coming again. Economies, I think, headed for recession. Cost of capital is much higher, and many users of construction services, of course, are very angry that construction costs are so high, and they're wondering, why are people they've been working with for decades charging them so much for doing the same things they've been doing? Well, the world has changed, of course, and so that shifted world is showing up in these elevated costs.
Well, and I think that goes even further to your point that education and maybe even wariness are really important in this environment. I know our members, they do a lot of issue spotting for their clients, and a second or a third set of eyes on contract terms, bond terms, and all that are going to be, as you said, very important coming up. So.
Actually, this is going to be one of the principal uses of artificial intelligence, is to look through contracts and make sure that certain clauses are there. AI can be programmed to do that. AI is already doing that. Work on behalf of attorneys and others, looking at contracts and making sure that clauses are there and have been implemented and executed as, per the agreement. And so I'm not suggesting to contractors, hey, go out and put all your contracts through ChatGPT. I don't know even if that would work. What I am saying is that make sure that you get those clauses right, because it can make the difference between survival and not survival during tough economic times.
I know that goes back to something you're always saying, Mark, which is read your contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't take anything for granted. Understand what's in there and keep rereading it as you're in the context of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, really resonates.
It is. So, as we move forward, and I know things are maybe not the brightest on the horizon, what advice could you give to bond producers working with their clients to help them be ready for the future?
Well, I would say that the circumstances are fraught with risk for bond producers as well, right? Isn't that right? I mean, if one expects the economy to turn down, as I do, maybe other people do not, and one expects the environment to become more challenging for contractors, then of course the environment is getting riskier. And so I would say be more careful. I would say be less aggressive in trying to gain market share, because that's the temptation, isn't it? Right? If I don't do this, if I don't allow, have this kind of pricing in place or this kind of structure in place, my competitor, who I hate, is going to get this deal. And the idea of a competitor getting a deal, and I'm the same way. When I go home at night, I pray for a few things. I pray for the health and well-being of the world, my family, the Orioles pitching staff, and also I pray for my competitors to die. Preferably violently. And I think we all feel that way about our competitors. And so, but let them take on the undue risk. Competitors. One should not have to do that themselves in this kind of environment.
Stick to your underwriting. Fundamentals.
Exactly. And don't stray for them during times like these, because again, we're seeing some subcontractor failure, and we are seeing now some project owners not being able to line up sufficient equity to keep projects going. So we are seeing, for the first time in quite some time, projects come to a stop, which is bad for everyone, of course.
And I thought I was reading, maybe it's an Apple's headquarter or Google or one of the large tech companies, that they have literally shut down mid-construction on a project because they're not certain about the economy going forward.
I think that's an 80-acre site in Silicon Valley. I want to say it's Google, but the point is, yes, exactly, that we're seeing that and actually we've been seeing this for quite some time, maybe about a year or so, that firms have shifted course, that all of a sudden those technology firms that were really gangbusters in terms of growth now are announcing layoffs. So, the likes of Microsoft and Google and Amazon and so on and so forth, have announced layoffs. Meta has announced significant layoffs. So, you look at that and you say, something's changing out there. We've gone from this period of very rapid economic rebound to firms saying, let's hold up, let's deal with headcount, and let's reduce some of these cost structures that we've put in place during the pandemic recovery period. None of that's particularly good for economic growth. And the Federal Reserve is still in the midst of trying to combat excess inflation. So we are still seeing rising cost of capital, even as the economy is weakening and even as fears of recession are already quite pervasive.
So if you could have someone listening to this episode, one thing they take away with them, what would that one thing be?
Well, I think the one thing is that I think that the economy is going to get pretty difficult to navigate for consumers, for businesses, for many folks. And so there has to be a change in orientation or adaptation to the economy if that has already not transpired. So, that's what this is about. And I'm speaking to a group, of course, of insurers who are trying to insure against bad economic outcomes. And what I'm suggesting is, at least macroeconomically, I think we're in for some negative economic outcomes, but that would mean microeconomically, meaning at the firm level, we might also see some bad outcomes naturally. And so this is what I would say is this a period fraught with risk. It's one of the riskier periods I've seen since, let's say, 2005, 2006, when we're seeing that housing market bubble. We're talking about a bubble, by the way, in 2005. It didn't burst until the next year, but we were talking about the bubble in housing before it burst. And now I'm starting to see in some of these segments maybe something similar is happening. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So in the banking sector, there's been some smoke. Is there a fire out there? I don't know, but it's a risk.
Right. So to borrow something from the Boy Scouts, be prepared, right?
Always. And obviously Surety is part of that.
Well, Anirban, thank you so much for talking to us before you get up on the main stage. If someone wants to find out more about Sage Consulting, where should they go?
www.sagepolicy.com.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.
Before we go, we just wanted to thank Liberty Mutual Surety again for their generous support in supporting this episode of Let's Get Surety. Liberty Mutual Surety provides contract and commercial bonds for all size companies and contractors around the world. Liberty Mutual is here for you today, tomorrow, together. For more information on Liberty Mutual's breadth of surety products and solutions, visit www.libertymutualsurety.com.